yesterday.
Likewise. I think, like many other people, a lot of my heart for this work comes from a place of pain, And what I like to tell people is that even though today I'm both a pastor as well as a psychologist and a professor, I was a pastor first. And I'm a psychologist today because of what I experienced as a pastor, several decades ago. Back in my early 20s, I was pastoring a young adult and a college group, and there was a young woman who shared with me that she experienced some sexual assaults on the part of a clergy member in our church. And that was very painful for her. It was very painful for me because I was in relationship with this individual. He was kind of a mentor figure for me as well. And that planted some long-term seeds in my heart. Questions like, how can people who know the Bible so well be capable of doing things like this, behind closed doors? Why do church systems regularly make decisions to protect the institution of the church and leave vulnerable people hanging? This is not of God. And certainly the Bible is still very important. It's foundational in my life. And yet at the same time, when I think of all the factors that are in play that shape us to be more virtuous people, people who contribute to the good in this world, people who are more like Jesus, it's a lot more other factors at play. And I was interested to see if we can find a way to use empirical research to identify what some of those things are so that we could work alongside communities of faith to live out our calling and live out our mission. So I am the Cliff and Joyce Penner Chair for the Formation of Emotionally Healthy Leaders at Fuller Theological Seminary. And my responsibility at the seminary, or my role, is to help the seminary rethink what theological education can look like if we were to take seriously the emotional formation of future Christian leaders and pastors, just as much as we take seriously the intellectual formation as well as the spiritual formation of the pastor. And one of the reasons why this is so important is because when I think about the kind of pastor that the world needs, it's not just the intellectual side, it's also the spiritual side, but it's also the emotional side. The pastors that I know that are thriving, that are impactful, they know themselves. They're relational people that you can trust and can develop intimacy with others. And I'm hoping to bring that more into the fore within theological education. My dream is actually to find a way to reshape and to form theological education so that seminaries can better form the kind of leaders that the world needs. The first way is through my work in trauma. So I'm a trauma psychologist, and one of the grants that I oversee that's funded by the Lilly Foundation is a project on trauma-informed care with a group of Black churches throughout the state of Texas. And it's in part doing trauma education, doing mental health education, but doing it in a faith integrative way. One of the things that a lot of pastors don't realize and a lot of churches don't realize is that most of our congregation has a trauma history. Right? We usually think of these things as something that's outside the gates of the church, but it's very much inside our communities. And a lot of our churches don't know how to talk about trauma. And in fact, a lot of times our churches, the messages that we preach, the implicit systems that we have, the policies that we have, they actually oftentimes re-traumatize people. And I think this is tragic, not just from a psychological perspective, but from a theological perspective as well, because when we think about the Christian faith, our faith is actually built upon a trauma. Jesus dying on the cross is a trauma. So Jesus knows what it's like to survive a trauma. And even after he died and resurrected, we still refer to him as the Lamb who was slain. He still shows his scars to doubting Thomas. And a lot of times in churches, we talk about, we want to be delivered from trauma. Trauma's going to magically disappear. We're going to go from victory to victory. And that's not even the case for Jesus. We need a spiritual language. We need a home for the realities of trauma survivors. One of my favorite definitions of what a trauma is a trauma is what happens when intense emotional pain cannot find a relational home in which it can be held and expressed. And my heart is that I want the church to provide that relational home. I want theologians to provide a theological home to hold and express the lived experience of trauma. And if we are able to do that, we can reach a whole generation of people all around the world. We are doing empirical and theological research on spiritual formation and spiritual maturity. And we are doing this not only on an ecumenical scale, so we have evangelical churches and denominations, mainline Protestant, Roman Catholic, Episcopal, Anglican, historically African. It's really, really diverse. And we're about to go global. And one of the reasons why we're doing that is because we're finding that when we think of things like Christian virtue, when we think of things like spiritual maturity, because Christianity is a global religion, we all share this common core. And yet at the same time, depending on our identity, depending on our culture, and depending on our context, we all live that out in different ways. We also understand that in different ways. So even take the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, so on and so forth. To be loving in North America actually is understood and embodied differently than what love might be embodied and understood in Africa or Latin America and Asia. And I don't think we're necessarily doing this on purpose, but most of the literature reflects a North American perspective. And I think we are all lacking if we don't hear from our brothers and sisters from other parts of the world. So part of my heart is that we can culturally decenter our understanding. We can culturally decenter the literature on virtue, on Christian formation, and on Christian discipleship so that we can do it robustly and thoughtfully and as the global religion that we are. So we've been doing empirical research to look at correlates and predictors of spiritual maturity, spiritual flourishing. And we found some really unexpected and pleasantly surprising results. For example, we found that one of the most robust and consistent predictors of spiritual maturity is actually intercultural competence. And this is panning out in the empirical data. But when we take a step back and reflect on this from a biblical perspective or reflect on it from a theological perspective or even a human kind of relational perspective, it makes a lot of sense because our relationship with God fundamentally is an intercultural relationship. God's not American. He's also not African, to be fair. He's not Asian. He's transcendent. And the more we think that God is American or Asian or African, I would suggest the less we actually know God. And a lot of this actually goes back to the Old Testament warnings about things like idolatry. And the problem with idolatry is that even though humans are created in God's image, we have something within our human sinful nature, this vulnerability, this disposition to actually turn that around 180 degrees and make God and form God out of our image, whether that involves our cultural image or the image related to our cultural values. But the reality is that spiritual formation is us being formed more into God rather than us forming God to be more like us. Honestly, I am hopeful about this. I think a lot of suffering and pain has come about because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And at the same time, I feel that the challenges of COVID have, for many of us, popped us out of our denial. In my psychotherapy practice, I'm still a licensed psychologist and mostly work with pastors and Christian leaders. I find that one of the most formidable challenges when I do mental health work with pastors is to get them to a place where they accept the reality that they need help. Because it's so common for us to just over-spiritualize, to gloss over the negative and go to the positive and go, oh, this is, it's all gonna turn out good, God's got a better plan. And he does, I believe that, but we can't bypass the journey of grief. We can't skip straight to men intend for bad, God intend for. We can't skip to that without actually going through the journey. I'm realizing that, and I'm observing that there's more and more Christian leaders out there that are realizing, like, I can't keep up this false self much longer. I'm going to have to reconcile with the reality of myself and the reality of my situation. And that's an invitation to another level of spiritual maturity and depth. And that's also an invitation to another level of human maturity and depth, and emotional maturity and depth as well. So it's actually a wonderful opportunity.
I think we'll wrap it. Is there anything else you want to say?
I'm good.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. David. Thank you for agreeing to do this.
You got it.